Order, please. Before we begin the day routine, the subject for this evening's late debate was submitted by the Honourable Member for Colchester-Muscatawba Valley. Be it resolved that members of this legislature recognize the positive enhancements being made every day for Nova Scotia seniors by the Ham government, but also realize how much more could be done if the federal government recognized the importance of seniors. Be debated this evening at 6 p.m. Begin the day routine presenting reading petitions. The Honourable Member for Pictou West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to table a petition on behalf of a number of Pictou County residents who are concerned about environmental, sediment, and odor problems in the West River estuary. And the operative clause reads that we, the undersigned, do solemnly declare the destruction of our environment, the desecration of our pristine rivers in Loch Broom and Lyons Brook are the direct result of the man-made causeway damming their flow. A bridge section in the causeway would alleviate this tragic concern. Our environment is the direct responsibility of provincial and federal government. For either to avoid this matter represents dereliction of duty. This problem must be rectified, and cost is of no consequence where our environment and fresh water are concerned. Mr. Speaker, this has been signed by 550 Pictou County residents, and I too have affixed my signature.
Petition is tabled. The Honourable Member for Timberlea Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to table a petition. The operative clause, therefore be it resolved, we the undersigned request the government hold a binding plebiscite asking the people of Nova Scotia to discontinue VLT use in our province. 392 Nova Scotians have signed this petition, Mr. Speaker, and I have affixed my signature.
Petition is tabled. Presenting reports of committees. Tabling reports, regulations, and other papers. Statements by ministers. The Honourable Minister of Human Resources.
I'm pleased to rise in the House of Assembly today to address the issue of protection for public service employees who report wrongdoing in their workplace. Mr. Speaker, the Government of Nova Scotia is committed to ensuring that Nova Scotians will continue to be served by a law-abiding, ethical, accountable government worthy of the public's trust. Unfortunately, the recent sponsorship scandal within the federal government seems to have eroded the public's confidence in the government in general. Mr. Speaker, it is of the utmost importance for the people of this province to have confidence that the ministers of this government are accountable for wrongdoing in any of their organizations, should it occur. Ministers must be made aware of serious wrongdoing within their departments, offices, and agencies, and we must ensure that public servants know that they can disclose wrongdoing within their work environment without fear of reprisal. Mr. Speaker, I can assure you that this has always been the policy of this government. I am here to report to the House today that this government is working to ensure that this policy is clearly stated in the legal framework of this province. This government intends to exercise its authority under the Civil Service Act and the Public Service Act to make regulations and policies. We will clarify the process by which a public servant may report illegal activity or wrongdoing. This will include protection for those who do so. Mr. Speaker, it should be noted that these regulations and policies will expand upon the provisions that already exist under the Occupational Health and Safety Act, the Ombudsman Act, the Human Rights Act, and Civil Service Act, and also under collective agreements and at common law. In developing processes and protections for the disclosure of wrongdoing, we must be mindful that it is in the best interest of the public we serve to have an impartial and loyal public service. Protection for employees who disclose wrongdoing does not mean that public servants are free to publicly criticize the legitimate policy or administrative decisions of elected officials. We must protect the government and its employees from senseless or malicious disclosure. Mr. Speaker, These would not be in keeping with the long-standing values of the public service in this province. Mr. Speaker, we expect regulations will go a long way toward clarifying both the rights and obligations of employees and the employer in disclosing wrongdoing should it occur. However, we also know that there is more that can be done, and this process is just the first step. Mr. Speaker, wrongdoing in any workplace is a symptom of an underlying problem in the organization. A considerable amount of work can be done to prevent problems in the first place by creating a good work environment. This can include employee training on how to deal with illegal, unethical, unfair, or immoral actions that an employee may encounter. In our workplace, employees should feel they are able to bring such matters forward openly. Strengthening internal processes allows for the appropriate authority to be informed early on and to take action quickly. Internal processes can limit the harm that may cause from malicious disclosure. Mr. Speaker, some people may wonder why we don't introduce new legislation to provide these protections. The answer is that the legislative authority is in place now to address this concern. It is also important to note, Mr. Speaker, that in Canada, no jurisdiction currently has proclaimed legislation on this issue. And in places where legislation has been used to provide this protection, there has been no evidence of increased reporting of wrongdoing. Mr. Speaker, preparation of new regulations is underway now. We expect to have these regulations in place within the next few weeks. We believe these measures are the appropriate way to address concerns about the ability of employees to report wrongdoing. They represent another step in our ongoing efforts to build a strong public service in Nova Scotia. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Order, please. Y'all member keep order, please. Order, please. Y'all member keep written over.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when I just heard what the minister had to say there, I was wondering about the word wrongdoing. Maybe does the word wrongdoing mean criminal activity or just wasteful spending of taxpayers' dollars? Maybe we could have that cleared up, Mr. Speaker. Regulations to protect workers will be under numerous laws, Occupational Health and Safety, Human Rights Act, a patchwork of regulations that is bound to leave numerous loopholes. Legislation allows public consultation and amendments, not backroom cabinet deals. Mr. Speaker, getting structure, Mr. Speaker, internal reporting before disclosure, I heard the minister say, result in burying complaints instead of disclosure, Mr. Speaker. Because other provinces do not have any legislature, Mr. Speaker, do not have any legislation on this, Mr. Speaker, doesn't make it right. That's right. Yeah. With the history of political patronage in this province, Mr. Speaker, we need protection for whistleblowers, Mr. Speaker, immediately. My esteemed colleague from Cape Breton, the NDP call for Whistleblower Act, the legislation introduced by Mr. Frank Corbett, my colleague, October 27, 2003. This is what we need in this legislation, Mr. Speaker. The NSGEU, Mr. Speaker, have not been consulted about this piece of legislation, Mr. Speaker. Nova Scotia Federation of Labour have not been consulted, despite repeated attempts to get in contact with the government and meet with the government, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we need legislation, not regulations, in this legislature to protect the people that are working in the civil service department of this government and other departments, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Order, please. Just remind honourable members to recognize other members in the House, not by their name, but by their constituency, please. Just over the last couple of days, this happened a few times, so appreciate it. The honourable member for Richmond.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to rise today to speak on this ministerial statement, and I want to thank the Minister for providing us with a copy of this before and congratulate her for the announcement here today. And certainly we're pleased to hear this Minister actually talking about her department, so that's a refreshing change here in this House. So, Mr. Speaker, our party agrees that public servants...
Well, it's true. First time we ever heard her.
Speaker, sensitive crew. Our party agrees that public servants need protection when reporting wrongdoing. Speaker, we also agree that the people need confidence in their government. What is unfortunate about this announcement is once again a member of the Executive Council is attacking another level of government when problems exist right here in Nova Scotia. If indeed there is a crisis in confidence, then the blame can be laid squarely at the feet of this government. The indecisiveness of this government was demonstrated yesterday and continues to be demonstrated on a daily basis. Mr. Speaker, I don't believe that this action by the minister. I don't believe that this action by the minister can end today without further debate. It certainly is not enough for the minister to simply stand in her place and announce regulations when we have duly elected members of this House that are here to have an open public debate about such an important issue. Mr. Speaker, this measure requires further debate and not an edict from the top in this government. Can Nova Scotians trust this government to safely protect employees who would report any wrongdoing? That remains clearly to be seen without having the regulations before us. Mr. Speaker, one only needs to look at the report of the Privacy Commissioner yesterday, in which it indicated that freedom of informations are too high and that applications now are nearing an all-time low. Secrecy is clearly the order day of this government, and this government has shown an unwillingness to provide Nova Scotians with full disclosure, and this announcement clearly has not changed that. Now, Mr. Speaker, may I also say I find it amusing that the minister would refer to incidents at the federal level prompting the action here today. Nova Scotians should quickly be reminded that it is a Conservative party that brought us electronic toilet seats here in this province. It is a Conservative party that took offshore money in the 80s and 90s and used it on the infamous roads to nowhere. It is the Conservative party that has provided us with continued accounting magics in the last number of years, and it is the Conservative party that provided us with a tax cut that made so much sense until yesterday, when it clearly, even the Premier admitted, it made no sense at all. If there is a lack of confidence in Nova Scotians here in this province, Mr. Speaker, it is in the Conservative Party of Nova Scotia and the current Ham government.
Any further statements by ministers? Government notice the motion. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas registered nurses and licensed practical nurses are a vital part of the healthcare system, and they continue to adapt to new roles and responsibilities to support their patients and provide leadership with healthcare. And whereas the Department of Health, through the Provincial Nursing Strategy, is sponsoring the second annual Leadership Conference for Nurses, called into a new era for nurses, new rules, new roles and practices, which begins today in Dartmouth. And whereas the Conference Planning Committee, representing a variety of health sector organizations, has arranged for nationally recognized nurse leaders to provide professional development for Nova Scotia's practicing nurses, nurse educators, and clinical nurse specialists throughout the healthcare system. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the legislature extend best wishes to the 250 RNs and LPNs from across Nova Scotia who are committed to continuing education and seeking out their own leadership potential. Mr. Speaker, I seek waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Question for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Earth Day is being marked across Canada on April 22nd, whereas Nova Scotia leads the nation in encouraging recycling and composting because of its progressive waste resource management strategy, and whereas the province of Nova Scotia and the Composting Council of Canada have joined forces with other community organizations to present a talk on gardening and composting by nationally known broadcaster Mark Cullen tonight here in Halifax, Therefore be it resolved that this House welcomes Mr. Cullen to Nova Scotia and thanks him for helping us spread the word that composting is good for the environment. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Nova Scotia prides itself on being one of the safest provinces in Canada in which to live, work, and raise a family, a climate which would be further enhanced if the current conditional sentencing protocols are amended. And whereas a priority of this government is to ensure that amendment to the criminal code by the federal government is made immediately so that no one convicted of a crime involving death or serious injury is eligible for a conditional sentence. And whereas while conditional sentences have found their place in the justice system, they are an unacceptable punishment for crimes such as sexual or aggravated assault and vehicular homicide. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the House speak with one voice and call on the federal Justice Minister to amend the criminal code as recommended to the Standing Committee on Justice and Human Rights to place appropriate limits on the use of conditional sentencing so that the punishment fits the crime. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Question for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Tourism and Culture.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas 50 years ago, on April 13, 1954, Inverness County lost one of its favorite sons, former Liberal leader, Honourable Angus L. MacDonald. And whereas Angus L. MacDonald was born August 10, 1890 in Dunvegan, Inverness County, and was a World War I veteran and professor with a doctorate from Harvard Law School. Whereas he served a distinguished career as Nova Scotia's Premier from 1933 to 1953, except for a brief time period from 1940 to 1945 when he served as our country's Minister of National Defence for Naval Services. Therefore, be it resolved, all members of the House acknowledge the valuable contribution made by one of our most revered premiers. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice, passage without debate.
Question for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. Introduction of bills. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you. And Mr. Speaker, I'd ask if you could permit me an introduction before introduction of the bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to take a moment to introduce to the House someone I think is known to most members, and that's Ms. Carol McCullough. And I'd ask her to rise. And Ms. McCullough and her association, the Construction Association of Nova Scotia, have been instrumental in being proponents for the bill that I'm about to introduce to the House today, a bill which they have been integrally involved in promoting through the Law Reform Commission of Nova Scotia, and I know there's many honourable members in the House who believe this is a good idea, and I'm sure Ms. McCullough looks forward to support from all segments of the House with respect to the bill, and so I thank Ms. McCullough on behalf of all members for her contribution. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 277 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Mechanics' Lien Act.
The Honourable Minister of Justice begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 277 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Mechanics' Lien Act.
Bill 58, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 277 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Mechanics' Lien Act.
Will this bill be read a second time to future date? The Honourable Member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I too beg leave to introduce an act to amend Chapter 1 of the Acts of 1994-95, the Environment Act.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth North begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 1 of the Acts of 1994-95, the Environment Act.
Bill 59, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 1 of the Acts of 1994-95, the Environment Act.
Will this bill be read a second time to future date? Recognize the Honourable Member for Digby Annapolis on an introduction.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to bring your attention to the West Wing and a couple of The West Gallery.
That's appropriate.
Right. What's wrong with a wing? The I would like to bring the House's attention to two people I know very well from Digby and Annapolis. First, my wife, Diane, of 32 years.
I hear the woman's a saint.
And Mr. Joe Casey, former member of Digby and Annapolis.
Bill, remember if he gets 33 years. Now that Joe's with him, if he gets 33.
Thank the honourable member for that. We certainly welcome our special guests to the gallery today and hope they enjoy the proceedings. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 87 of the Acts of 1915, an act respecting the Antigonish Farmers Mutual Fire Insurance Company, and Chapter 105 of the Acts of 1981, an act to confer additional powers upon the Antigonish Farmers Mutual Fire Insurance Company.
The Honourable Minister of Health begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 87 of the Acts of 1915, an act respecting the Antigonish Farmers Mutual Fire Insurance Company, and Chapter 105 of the Acts of 1981, an act to confer additional powers upon Antigonish Farmers Mutual Fire Insurance Company.
Bill 60, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 87 of the Acts of 1915, an act respecting the Antigonish Farmers Mutual Fire Insurance Company, and Chapter 105 of the Acts of 1981, an act to confer additional powers upon Antigonish Farmers Mutual Fire Insurance Company.
Or this bill be read a second time at a future date. Notice of motion. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Premier stated that he was heeding the wishes of Nova Scotians when he announced that the income tax cut would be suspended to pay for needed health services. And whereas Nova Scotians have been even more outspoken in demanding an end to the financial assessments that are impoverishing seniors in long-term care. Whereas Nova Scotians have made it clear that effective action to shorten health care wait times is a top priority for them, despite the outrageous cut in federal transfers. Therefore, be it resolved that this House urges the government to do the right thing in tomorrow's budget by ending the compulsory use of seniors' life savings to pay for long-term care and having a real plan to shorten wait times. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Notice is tabled. The Honourable Member for Cape Breton South.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on June 19, 1999, John Hamm told the Chronicle Herald that he can't promise tax cuts in addition to balancing the budget and properly financing health care. Whereas the Premier said, I don't think Nova Scotians would believe that because they know it's not doable. And whereas for some reason the Premier failed to take his own advice but instead went on to promise a tax cut anyway. Therefore, be it resolved, the members of the House urge the Premier to admit that he never truly believed that tax cuts were possible without sacrificing health and a balanced budget, and that somewhere along the way the Premier compromised principle in order to get elected. I would ask for a waiver on that, Mr. Speaker.
Order, please. Order, please. I think it's impugn a motive, and it's actually bringing into question the credibility of a member of the House, and I order that that's out of order. Now, a member for Guysborough Sheet Harbour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Halifax West MP Jeff Regan sat silent as his colleagues lost $100 million taxpayer dollars in the sponsorship scandal, and whereas Nova Scotians heard nothing from Mr. Regan as his Liberal colleagues shoveled taxpayers' money into a bottomless pit they called the Federal Gun Registry, and whereas Mr. Regan said nothing as the Liberal government cut more funding from Nova Scotia health care than any federal government in Canadian history, therefore be it resolved that all members of this House agree that Nova Scotians are not fooled by Mr. Regan's attempt to divert attention from the federal scandal with his silly game of shift the blame, and I request waiver, Mr. Speaker.
Request for waiver. Here a no. Notice is tabled. The honourable member for Pictou West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the 6 municipal units in Pictou County have come together to hire a new emergency measures coordinator, and whereas Don McKenzie of Alma, Pictou County, has been selected for this position because of his qualifications in many areas associated with emergencies, including firefighting, and whereas Mr. McKenzie's duties will include coordinating each of the municipality's EMO plans into one and finding first responders that can make a regional EMO system work. Therefore, it be resolved that this Nova Scotia Legislature congratulate the 6 municipal governments of Pictou County for their cooperative regional approach and wish them and Don McKenzie every success with their new regional EMO system. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver and passage without debate.
Request for waiver is agreed. All those in favour say aye. Counterminded nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Conservatives told all Nova Scotians they would not waver from their stated financial principles, and whereas the Conservatives made living up to their fiscal promises the hallmark of their government, and whereas the Conservatives announced yesterday the partial rescinding of their tax cut, even though the best time to do the right thing had passed last spring before the provincial election. Therefore, be it resolved that the government should apologize to Nova Scotians for having to reach back into their pockets for a tax cut they knew we couldn't afford 12 months ago. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
For waiver. Here are several noes. Notice is tabled. The honourable member Kings North.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution.
The honourable member Kings North.
Whereas Kentville native Duncan Smith was the recipient of the 2003 Barnes Service Award for the Westminster School in Simsbury, Connecticut, and whereas Duncan Smith received the award for outstanding and exemplary volunteer service to the community, and whereas Mr. Smith has served as president of the Student Organization for the Needy and was a leader in organizing the Westminster School's annual Multiple Sclerosis Walk, as well as a program that mentors inner-city youth. Therefore, be resolved that members of this House congratulate Duncan Smith on being honoured with the 2003 Barnes Service Award and recognize his many efforts to help those in need. I request waiver of notice.
Request for waiver is agreed. All those in favour say aye. Counterminded nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas there are 65 Nova Scotians afflicted with a serious metabolic storage disorder known as Fabry disease, and whereas this disease causes severe pain and deterioration of the kidney, heart, brain, and nervous system, thereby causing persons with this disease to endure emotional and physical suffering that ultimately ends in premature death. And whereas the enzyme replacement therapy needed to allow persons with Fabry disease to experience dramatic improvements in their health and quality of life costs approximately $250,000 per person per year, which they cannot afford. Therefore, be it resolved that the Nova Scotia government recognize the importance of providing health care to all Nova Scotians and make a decision regarding the funding of enzyme replacement therapy. Mr. Speaker, and I request waiver and passage without debate.
Request waiver is agreed. All those in favour say aye. Counterminded nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Middleton Regional High School Blues hockey team and the senior girls Wolverines basketball team recently won Nova Scotia provincial championships, and whereas both teams represented their school with pride and skill, and whereas these provincial titles for Middleton Regional High School continue the tradition of sporting excellence, therefore be it resolved that all members of this House extend congratulations to the Middleton Regional High School Blues hockey team and the senior girls Wolverines basketball team. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver and passage without debate.
Request for waiver is agreed. All those in favour say aye. Counterminded nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Shelburne.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas, with participants coming from as far away as Arizona, the Shelburne County Nature and Birding Festival has been described as a success this year, and whereas the South Shore Tourism Association and Discover Shelburne County played an important role in arranging and promoting this nature event. And whereas well-known Shelburne County birders Murray Newell, Clyde Stoddard, and Grant Milroy all participated in this year's festival. Therefore, be it resolved, members of this House of Assembly congratulate all those associated with the 2004 Shelburne County Nature and Birding Festival and wish them even more success in 2005. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver.
Request for waivers, agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Cape Breton Nova.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas March 13, 2004, the new MRI was officially opened at the Cape Breton Regional Hospital, and whereas thus far approximately 225 patients Thank you.
Start again.
From the top? Whereas March 13, 2004, the new MRI was officially opened at the Cape Breton Regional Hospital, and whereas thus far approximately 225 patients have used the services of this new and sophisticated equipment, and whereas treatment of this magnitude can now be administered at the Cape Breton Regional Hospital versus having traveled to Halifax, therefore, be it resolved that the members of this Legislative Assembly congratulate the Cape Breton District Health Authority in acquiring this state-of-the-art equipment, to the Cape Breton Regional Hospital Foundation team for its efforts, and to the community for its generous support. Mr. Speaker, I hereby request passage. I hereby request waiver and passage without debate.
Request for waivers, agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Glace Bay.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on
Order,
a future...
please. Order, please. The honourable member for Glace Bay.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas in the leaders' debate during the last election, the Premier told the member from Halifax Citadel, "You, sir, are going to shrink the economy with your backwards thinking." And whereas yesterday, truly backwards thinking was demonstrated when the Premier said the tax cut would be interrupted until Ottawa provides more money for health. And whereas... to give a tax cut. And whereas the Premier has finally admitted...
Order, please. The honourable member.
And whereas the Premier has finally admitted that any money provided for health from Ottawa will be used for a tax cut. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House demand that the government use any health money from Ottawa for health care as it was intended, and not for the purpose of reintroducing an ill-conceived tax cut. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waiver. Here and no. Notice is tabled. The honourable member for Chester St. Margaret's.
To move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the war on terrorism continues and will need continued strength from hundreds of thousands of Canadians and millions of Americans and others worldwide. And whereas the owners of Julian's Bakery in Chester showed the kind of resolve we all need in this troubling time when they learned that the son-in-law of one of their best customers would not be able to come home for Christmas because of the posting in Afghanistan. And whereas Didier Julien and Laura Mulrooney, after learning about their customer's son-in-law, had staff put together 100 treat bags for each member of the son-in-law's field engineer squadron. Therefore, be it resolved, members of this House of Assembly applaud the kindness and significant thought which was put into this gift-giving initiative by Julian's Bakery at such an important time for members of the Canadian military overseas. Mr. Speaker, I hereby request waiver.
Good member.
Request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable leader of the official opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day, I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Westfall Coal Harbour Firefighters Association is hosting its annual banquet and awards night on Saturday, April 24th. And whereas the Westfall Coal Harbour Firefighters Association is renowned for its many brave members who risk limb and life to serve and protect the residents and the communities in the area and beyond. And whereas the evening will honor veteran Paul Josie, who has served tirelessly and with distinction during his 30-year career. Mr. Speaker, therefore, be it resolved that the members of the House join me in extending congratulations to Westfall Coal Harbour firefighter Paul Josie for his perseverance and commitment to duty and to the community he serves. And, Mr. Speaker, I'd request waiver and passage without debate.
Question for waivers, agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Richmond.
Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on October 9, 2004, the leader of the NDP told the Chronicle Herald that it was too late to cancel the tax cut and that Liberals were engaged in what he called hysterical hyperbole. Whereas yesterday, the member from Halifax Fairview accused the Liberal Party of continuing to fight the last election, although they continue to promote the failed idea of public no-fault auto insurance. Whereas the NDP could have supported the Liberal position in the fall that tax cuts should be delayed. Therefore, be it resolved that the NDP recognize that they were full participants in a Tory tax scheme that has jeopardized our healthcare system, and that yesterday's announced tax hike could have been avoided if the NDP cared more about Nova Scotians than their own political image.
Notice is tabled. The honourable member for Colchester North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, yesterday I introduced a resolution, and due to the overwhelming response and the noise in the chamber, we couldn't hear the request for waiver, so I'll reintroduce it. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Turks and Caicos is a Caribbean treasure consisting of 40 islands and a population of almost 19,000 people that is currently governed as a British territory, and whereas the government of the Turks and Caicos has expressed an interest in joining Canada, and whereas the province of Nova Scotia has a long and proud history of conducting trade with the Caribbean, therefore be it resolved that the government of Nova Scotia initiate discussions with the Turks and Caicos to become part of the province of Nova Scotia and encourage the government of Canada to welcome the Turks and Caicos as part of our country. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Question for waivers, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried.
Going. Well, I got no pride.
Any further resolutions? The honourable member for Kings North.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Scots Bay Capsea Site Community Hall recently held a successful open house and creative arts exhibit that showcased talent from the area, and whereas first place winner of the People's Choice Award at the Creative Arts exhibit was Walter Huntley for his beautiful wood turning of bowls, vases, and a ship's wheel clock, and whereas second place winner at the event was Bill Tupper for his detailed musical instruments, which included a fiddle made out of bird's eye maple. Therefore be resolved that the members of this House congratulate Walter Huntley and Bill Tupper on their rewards and recognize Scots Bay Capsea Site Community Hall staff Natalie Steele and Belinda Tupper, whose efforts contribute to making this year's open house and creative art exhibit such a success. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice.
Agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Chester St. Margaret's.
Notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Chester designer Kelly Moore is now 6 months into her new position as president of the Association of Interior Designers of Nova Scotia, and whereas Ms. Moore has a busy agenda established in her new position over the next 2 years, especially in the light of the passage of the Interior Designers legislation in the House of Assembly last spring, which made Nova Scotia the first province in Canada to regulate exactly who can call themselves interior designers, and whereas Ms. Moore has already played host to the Association of Interior Designers of Canada, meeting in Halifax while addressing the need for a lack of training of interior designers. Therefore, be it resolved, MLAs congratulate Kelly Moore of Chester and wish her continued success with her career in her position as President of the Association of Interior Designers of Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion's carried. The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on April 14, 2004, an early morning fire destroyed the Northern Yacht Club in North Sydney, and whereas the North Sydney Fire Department, with mutual aid from Sydney Mines, French Vale, and Georges River volunteer fire departments, were able to save the junior sailing building and a large commercial building, and whereas the Northern Yacht Club employs 5 full-time and a number of part-time staff and is home to many community events such as the junior sailing program, wedding and anniversary celebrations, therefore be resolved that the members of this House recognize the commitment of the Northern Yacht Club to rebuild their infrastructure and build on the strong history it already has in the community of North Sydney. And Mr. Speaker, I request a waiver of notice and approval of debate.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Matt Climie was named the 2003-2004 Most Valuable Player in the Maritime Junior A Hockey League and was a first-team All-Star. And whereas Matt Climie led the MJHL goaltenders in wins, goals against average, save percentage, games played, and minutes played, and the Maritime Junior A Hockey League MVP and All-Star awards are voted on by team general managers who cannot vote for their own players. And whereas Matt Climie has signed a letter of intent to play NCAA Division I hockey at Bemidji State University in Minnesota. Therefore, be resolved that this House congratulate Matt Climie on being named the 2003-2004 Maritime Junior A Hockey League MVP and first-team All-Star, and wish him every success in his academic and hockey pursuits at Bemidji State University. And Mr. Speaker, I request a waiver of notice and passage of the vote.
Agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Lunenburg residents Bliss and Chloe Comstock are part of the Nova Scotia curling team, skipped by Jill Mauser along with Paige Matty, who won silver at the World Junior Women's Curling Championship in Quebec in March. And whereas the Scotia team have had an outstanding year, having been crowned the Canadian National Junior Champions in February in British Columbia. And whereas the team that can boast to a whopping 10 consecutive games with no losses and having Nova Scotia's best ever finish in the Worlds, therefore it be resolved that the members of the House of Assembly congratulate Jill Mauser, Bliss and Chloe Comstock, and Paige Matty on their excellent performance at the World Junior Women's Curling Championship. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas educators who inspire students to question, investigate, and discover their world was the focus this year as Education Week celebrated scientific literacy. And whereas the keynote speaker at the awards this year was Wolfville Junior High Grade 9 student Ellen Whitman, who has benefited from the enthusiasm and dedication of her science teachers. And whereas last year Ms. Whitman won the Regional Science Fair for her project, done in French, and went on to translate her project to English to compete at the Canada-wide Science Fair in Calgary. Therefore, be it resolved that members of this House recognize Ellen Whitman for her efforts to acknowledge the dedicated science teachers of this province and wish her much success in her future academic endeavors. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver.
Waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Orders of the day or questions put by members. Question period begin at 2:53 and at 4:13. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Janet Frank is the president of the Eastern Passage Minor Baseball Association. About 70 kids take part in this program, and their ages range from 7 to 17. Last fall, Hurricane Juan put one of the gyms of that association, that association relies on, out of commission. Now, this shouldn't have been a major problem. The Eastern Passage Education Center is nearby. It has a beautiful gym. The trouble, of course, Mr. Speaker, is that it is a P3 school and that it costs $50 an hour to rent the gym, a fee that association, the kids, and the parents can't afford. So, Mr. Speaker, my question for the Minister of Education is, what are you going to do to control P3 rental fees?
Here, here, here.
Order, please. Is he either the Minister of Education or acting minister? Order, please. Order, please. Order, please. I'm going to readjust the time. Question period will begin at 2:55. Sorry. 2:55. And the Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That question was so good, I wanted an opportunity to ask it again anyway. Janet Frank is the president of the Eastern Passage Minor Basketball Association. About 70 kids take part in this program. The ages range from 7 to 17. Last fall, Hurricane Juan put one of the gyms of this association out of commission. Now, this should not have been a problem because the Eastern Passage Education Center is nearby. It has a beautiful gym. The trouble, Mr. Speaker, as I mentioned, is that it's a P3 school and it costs $50 an hour to rent the gym, a fee that the association, the kids, and their parents say that they can't afford. So my question for the Minister of Education is this: what is he going to do to control P3 rental fees?
Here, here.
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, I would refer to the legislation which was debated in the House yesterday, just to indicate that the government recognizes the desirability of schools for community use. In regards to the 3P, and it did comment on that, we continue negotiation with the 3P partners to try and resolve these issues. Unfortunately, as the member well knows, and others know, that the negotiations are a bit protracted and a little difficult.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, the Eastern Passage Basketball Association has made the best of what is a very bad situation for them. They cut practice hours, they cut games, and they cut tournaments. And Janet Frank says it's hard to watch because the local gym sits empty while 70 kids would love a chance to play more. Mr. Speaker, students and nonprofit community groups are being punished for bad P3 deals made by the last Liberal government. Minister, there are plenty of examples of limitations placed on service contracts in the public interest. What will it take for you to intervene in this case?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, I will reiterate what I said before with 3P partners, and indeed one can sit back and reflect whether they were or were not good decisions made by the previous government. But the fact is that we are trying to work with the 3P partners to resolve some of these issues.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As members of this House know, inactivity has been linked to diabetes, depression, and other illnesses. Improving access to P3 schools would immediately help thousands of people. It seems somewhat hypocritical, Mr. Speaker, that the Premier and the Minister of Health Promotion both attended a photo op this morning while this government continues to ignore the P3 problem. So my final question to the Minister of Education is, when will your department limit P3 fees and bring some fairness and consistency to this province?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member knows full well that there was an arbitration delivered back in January this year concerning the relationship between government and school boards and those who own or 3P schools. Mr. Speaker, we'll continue to work through a legitimate process to try and resolve this matter. Unfortunately, it is certainly taking longer, and I understand what the honourable member is talking about. It's something that we wish we didn't have to go through, but we're working through it as best we can.
The honourable member for Glace Bay.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Health. Mr. Speaker, today Nova Scotians find themselves rather confused by this government. Last spring they were told that health care was getting more money and that we could afford a tax cut. They were assured that the tax cut was affordable and that it was not being siphoned off from the health care system. Yesterday, Mr. Speaker, the Premier said that he would have to interrupt his tax cut until the federal government comes up with more money for health care. So my question for the Minister of Health is simply, Mr. Speaker, if the federal government gives the province more money, will it be used for a tax cut or will it be used for health care?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, tomorrow when the Minister of Finance delivers his budget to the Assembly, the honourable member opposite will learn clearly that this government has committed significant additional dollars for the purposes of health care, and those dollars will be paid for by the citizens of the province of Nova Scotia. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Glace Bay on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, let's hope that the budget is more clear than the Premier's message on the tax cut. This summer, the Minister will be meeting with his federal and provincial counterparts to discuss more money for health care. Mr. Speaker, it's going to be very difficult for the Minister to ask for more money for health when this government is on record as saying the tax cut is going to be reintroduced. In fact, they've proven that more federal money from last year was being used for a tax cut and not for health care. So, Mr. Speaker, my question to the Minister of Health, will he categorically and emphatically state that a tax cut will not be reintroduced if he gets more money for health care?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, our record speaks for itself. With or without the federal government, we have added more money to health care year over year, and we'll continue to do that, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Glace Bay on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, you know, the Minister is right. The record does speak for itself, and any trust that this government had is now absolutely gone when it made the admission that health care money was being used for their tax cut, Mr. Speaker. Thankfully, some of that money is going to be restored. The premiers and others have stated that they want a minority government to work, Mr. Speaker. It can only happen when a government is honest and truthful. Well, Mr. Speaker, I am urging honesty and perhaps even, Mr. Speaker, a little humility on the part of the government today. So my final question for the Minister of Health, what concrete steps will the Minister take to ensure that dollars that are meant for health care go to health care and not a tax cut?
Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, I find it quite strange to hear the honourable member opposite use the word humility from that party over there. Mr. Speaker, they are unabashed in their intention. They're unabashed in their intention to defend Paul Martin and the federal Liberals. They're backing away from the commitment of John Chrétien when he was Prime Minister, and he would stand and use the word humility in the context of that, Mr. Speaker, is despicable.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise on a very important question. In 2001, members of this House took a much-needed basic step forward in the protection of women from domestic violence. By passing the Domestic Violence Protection Act, this House intended to prevent situations like that which befell Laurie Maxwell of Truro or countless other women across this province. One of the most important provisions of this Act was to provide for emergency protection orders. These orders give women in crisis short-term protection they need to get out of abusive situations and to seek long-term help. However, 10 days ago, Mr. Speaker, a Manitoba judge overturned a law almost identical to the one in Nova Scotia. My question is, what action has the minister taken to evaluate the implications of this decision for the women of Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, of course, I'm aware of the decision that the Honourable Leader of the Opposition refers to. We are in the process of studying that decision to see what implications it may have in Nova Scotia. As the Honourable Member would be aware, it has no legal binding effect in Nova Scotia, as it was the decision of a court in another province of this country. But we are obviously looking at the matter, and it is our determination to ensure that if there are legislative changes required to that act to make it more effective in protecting abused spouses, we are prepared to do so. Thank you.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on your first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, as the minister knows, the arguments that were used in that case were every bit as applicable in this province as they were in the province of Manitoba, and this deals with a technical provision with respect to onus. So I would transition House workers say that if the onus in this particular legislation is reversed, forcing women to prove conditions of abuse, as the Manitoba judge suggests, the provision might as well be taken out because it will provide no protection. Research indicated the use of protection orders in domestic abuse situations is not always the safest option for women and children, yet this measure continues to be promoted heavily by the Department of Justice and Community Services. So my question for the minister is this: with the validity of this measure now in question, how will you ensure women and children in violent situations will be protected come what may?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you very much, and I do appreciate the question from the honourable member. I know he shares our concern with respect to domestic violence in this province, and I can assure the honourable member that that piece of legislation remains the law of Nova Scotia. There is no court decision striking it down. We are obviously studying the decision to make sure that if there are further legislative changes required, that we do so. But I like the honourable member, am very concerned that we not put the victim in a situation of proving that they are in fact a victim.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, if a woman suffering abuse or harassment applied for a peace bond today, it could be months before she gets the needed protection. In the meantime, her abuser will be able to engage in economic and emotional blackmail, and possibly continued abuse while retaining access to the family home. So my question for the minister is, what assurances will you give women in Nova Scotia today that your government will take every measure necessary, including the adequate funding of support programs and transition houses, to address the safety of women and children in abusive situations?
Good question. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you very much, and again to the honourable member, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we share his concern about the matter. We recognize that that this legislation is part of an array of options that should be available to the abused spouse to make sure that they can make the best decision for themselves and their children to prevent further abusive activity on the part of the other spouse. We remain committed to that. We remain committed to transition houses, Mr. Speaker, and I intend to make sure that if there is any further legislative action that needs to be taken by that House, that the appropriate legislation is laid in front of the House. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Halifax, Clayton Park.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Finance. In May last year, the Premier told the Rotary Club that the tax cuts were a win-win situation. We could have tax cuts and also pay for health and education. On October 9th, 2003, the Premier told a local newspaper that his plan for a 10% tax cut was still on track, despite knowing of a $160 million reduction in transfers from Ottawa. And now in pre-budget speeches, the Minister of Finance continued to trumpet the justification for tax cuts at this time. Now, Mr. Speaker, the tax cut has been rescinded for some, but rather than rescinding it on a go-forward basis to recoup funds we desperately need for services, the Minister has chosen to make this tax cut retroactive to January 1st. Nova Scotians have had to live with difficult decisions by this government as a result of poor planning and weak management. My question for the Minister, Mr. Speaker, is, will the Minister stand today and reassure Nova Scotians that no further taxation or revenue-generating measures will be buried in tomorrow's budget?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And the member raises a question of what happened last year. She raises a question about the transfers and the different things that happened last year. All I can say to the honourable member, Mr. Speaker, is it will all become clear tomorrow when we release the budget.
The honourable member of Halifax, Clayton Park, on your first supplementary.
And you still didn't get a majority.
Thank you. I hear no reassurance for Nova Scotians in that statement. Despite all the disasters the minister would like to blame for last year's budget pressures, hurricanes, floods, and snowstorms, the biggest disaster, Mr. Speaker, was poor financial planning. Mr. Speaker, on Monday, the minister told the Chamber of Commerce that he had a surplus of $14.5 million for 0304, and he claimed, and he claimed that this was the result of managing the purse wisely. No. Okay, we'll wait. I'll wait. And he claimed that this was the result of managing the purse.
Order, please. The honourable member of Halifax, Clayton Park has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. He claimed also that this was the result of managing the purse wisely. Now we learn the truth, Mr. Speaker. This surplus will result from clawing back taxes from Nova Scotians, approximately $25 million worth, money that has already been given to taxpayers. Mr. Speaker, so now the public knows that a last-minute accounting change and a tax clawback have conjured up a phantom surplus for this government. So I ask the minister, why did the minister neglect to tell Nova Scotians that the announced surplus was possible only because of a clawback of income tax?
Now, Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And what I did share with the Chamber and what I've been sharing with people is that, Mr. Speaker, when you start using GAAP procedures, you start using accounting principles known as GAAP, you have to take those goods and with the bads. She refers to the fact that we had brought back in some TCA changes. What she didn't say to this House, Mr. Speaker, is last year, because we were on GAAP, last year because we recorded the post-retirement benefits, it cost our budget $43 million. So, Mr. Speaker, the net changes that we had in GAAP were negative to us, not positive.
The honourable member of Halifax, Clayton Park, on your final supplementary.
That's what it is.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The minister refers to introduction of GAAP, which is not generally done in a retroactive manner. However, the minister and this government rolled the dice and lost. They were warned last spring.
Keep going, keep going.
They were warned last spring before the election that we couldn't afford it. They were told last fall not to implement in the first place. And we were promised decisive leadership, and we get flip-flops. With the backing of the NDP, we went ahead and implemented the tax cut retroactive to January 1. The question is, when is the minister going to take control of the finances of this province instead of lurching from one self-inflicted crisis to another?
Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, the question that I think I heard her ask was, when are we going to take control of the finances? Mr. Speaker, I can point to this government has brought in 3 balanced budgets. I can point to the fact that we've put more money in education and in health. And, Mr. Speaker, that's what we believe the people of Nova Scotia want.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, the latest Consumer Price Index has been released, and it shows that last year home insurance rates jumped by 17%. That's the second highest jump in the country. New Brunswick was first. We've been hearing from Nova Scotians who feel that insurance companies have been trying to recoup auto losses by going after home insurance. My question for the minister responsible for insurance is this: will you now urge the Insurance Review Board to speed up their review of home insurance?
The Honourable the Deputy Premier.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, in response to the question from the Leader of the Opposition, I believe he's well aware of the fact that there is no province that I know of as yet that has taken anything substantive into consideration for reducing the insurance rates for property, casualty, and liability. Mr. Speaker, we are a leader in that field in that we have charged our Insurance Review Board to tackle that matter and to report back to me, and I will in turn report to the legislature in November of this year.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on your first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the government is content to wait until November. Meanwhile, no one is keeping their eye on insurance companies who earned a record profit last year while crying poor to this government. Last fall, we filed a Freedom of Information request with the Department of Environment and Labor looking for their records on home insurance. And this is what we got back, Mr. Speaker, a letter saying that there isn't anything. We were told, quote, "We are unable to locate any records pertaining to your request." So I'd like to table that letter. And my question for the minister responsible for insurance is this: why is your government doing nothing to address skyrocketing home insurance?
The Honourable the Deputy Premier.
Mr. Speaker, there's that word again. Mr. Speaker, we acted in response to the skyrocketing auto insurance rates that were being charged by the insurance companies. And Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to say that today Nova Scotia enjoys the lowest insurance rates for automobiles across this country.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, I guess that just proves you can say anything you want here, Mr. Speaker. I don't know what world the minister is living in, but it isn't the same world that the rest of us are hearing. Mr. Speaker, in the absence of action from your government, Nova Scotians have been trying to...
Order, please. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the absence of action from your government, Nova Scotians have been trying to come up with their own solutions. Mr. Speaker, credit unions have asked this government to give them the ability to meet the property insurance needs of their members, and the government denied the request, Mr. Speaker. I want to ask the minister, why is your government refusing to act on this problem and putting roadblocks in the way of those who are willing to do something?
The Honourable Deputy Premier.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member asks what kind of a world I live in. Well, I live in a real world, which is somewhere where the NDP hasn't yet visited.
The Honourable Member for Preston. The Honourable Member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Economic Development. Mr. Speaker, over the last number of months, the Premier and the Minister of Finance have been bragging about the number of new jobs created in Nova Scotia, but they refuse to tell the whole story when it comes to employment. Mr. Speaker, rural Nova Scotia has been hurting since the election of this government because they have been abandoning our local economies. My question to the Minister is, why has the government abandoned the rural economies?
The Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and certainly the member's right. Nova Scotia
under this administration have enjoyed the highest employment levels ever in the history of this province, with over 442,000 Nova Scotians employed. In March alone, Mr. Speaker, another 3,000 people in Nova Scotia acquired full-time jobs. That's not a government that ignores rural Nova Scotia or any part of Nova Scotia.
Now, member for Preston on your first supplementary.
That's the scary part.
I'm glad to hear that the minister believes that he hasn't abandoned rural Nova Scotia, but the facts are, since June 2003, the month people received $155 checks. The unemployment rate in the Annapolis Valley has gone from 9 to 9.8%. 800 jobs were lost. In the North Shore region, Truro, Pictou, Amerton to the Causeway, the unemployment rate has gone from 9.7% to 10.4%. 2,900 jobs lost. In southwest Nova Scotia, Lunenburg, Yarmouth to Clare, unemployment has gone from 10.3 to 11.9%. 3,800 jobs lost. In Cape Breton, unemployment has gone from 15.1 to 15.9%. 3,900 jobs have gone. The minister can say whatever he wants, but this government is responsible for devastating our rural economies. Will the minister not admit we have a problem and commit to adopting policies that will help to grow our rural economies?
The Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And the honourable member asked a very good question. First of all, this government is very concerned about employment in every area of Nova Scotia, and that's why we support such programs as the nominee program to assist in locating people to rural Nova Scotia and investment. But the other thing we do is we encourage and support businesses, whether it's the Castings Limited, whether it's Ocean Nutrition, who are employing 150 in Mulgrave. But I would recommend to the member opposite that he take a course in actually reading stats. I believe he neglected to look at the seasonally adjusted rate, Mr. Speaker.
Now, member for Preston on your final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I don't know how you seasonally adjust so many jobs being lost. But anyway, if that's the approach that the government's going to take, it's unbelievable. Mr. Speaker, the legacy of this government will be the devastation of our rural economies unless something is done and done immediately. Avonport Foods, Britex, Airsag Fisheries are businesses which this government has hung out to dry, Mr. Speaker, and the people are paying for it with their jobs and their livelihood. Will the minister stand in his place today and tell the people of rural Nova Scotia that their government hasn't forgotten all about them completely?
The Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotians and the member opposite knows that certainly there are going to be businesses that have problems from time to time. And we work very closely with those businesses to make the adjustments, to do our best to ensure that that workforce either remains employed with that company or with other employers. What the member opposite neglected to talk about in various areas, as I mentioned, is companies like Cape Breton Castings, companies like Convergys, who are going to Cornwallis with 500 jobs, Lightbridge to Liverpool, as well as companies like Ocean Nutrition with an extra 150 jobs in a community like Mulgrave. Obviously, the member is remembering the years he was in government, not this government.
The honourable member for Timberlea Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question through you is to the Minister of Education. Earlier this week, the government stood and with a straight face told students, their families, and universities that they were going to get an $8 million increase. To put that in perspective, Mr. Speaker, this would be one of the single largest increases universities have received in the last 10 years. If that was not fact, it is certainly fiction. Instead, this government is trying to get away with slipshod accounting to see if they can convince students they are committed to post-secondary education. Instead, tuitions will go up again this year, maintaining the dubious honor and distinction across this country of having the highest distinction of the highest tuition in the country. Minister, when will your government take responsibility for the damage caused to higher education through these senseless policies?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, the Premier spoke yesterday, the first question to begin the question period, indeed the increased universities is 1%. One could go back and do the mathematics if you want to, and I understand where the 4% figure came from. Unfortunately, it would be estimate to, anyway, I will explain that to him if he wants. But the fact is they're going to get $2 million more in this year. And it isn't, you know, but I want to tell you, Mr. Speaker, if you go back and you take a look across Canada, this is not a good year for provinces and territories in education. And you will find that the commitment that this government has made to education at all levels is as great as has been made in any jurisdiction in this country.
The honourable member for Timberley Prospect on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, let me tell you, Mr. Minister, it's not a good year for students either. Yesterday, Dalhousie University became the latest institution to increase its tuition. Students at Dal will see a tuition increase of nearly $400, making their tuition one of the highest in Canada. And on top of this, medical students who are in short supply will face another $500 in fees, and students will be forced to pay more and more each and every time they go to register. Minister, why is it that an election short 8 months ago, and now you are already breaking those promises to students and their families? Students are hurting. They need more than assurances. They need dollars.
The honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, I know that our tuitions in Nova Scotia are the highest, basically the highest in the country for universities. On the other hand, Mr. Speaker, we have the best university system in the country overall. And I guess I would be more concerned, Mr. Speaker, if there was not quality associated with the dollars that students are paying here.
Timberley Prospect on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, students across this province and their parents will be forking out more next year, but they will not have any real help from this government. So they have to resort to using food banks, such as my daughter's Nova Scotia College of Art and Design. They have to resort to working excessive hours at near full-time jobs, and far too many will be forced to interrupt or to end their post-secondary education altogether. Mr. Minister, how do you believe that keeping our universities competitive is accomplished by forcing them and these young people to compete for the dubious title of the most expensive tuitions in the country?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to remind the honourable member that despite the fact that the resources of Nova Scotia are not always that great, we do provide the second highest per capita funding to universities in the country.
Hear, hear.
The honourable member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Economic Development. In August 2002, the province signed an agreement with the Federal Department of Immigration to establish a provincial nominee program. This program allows the province to participate in the selection of immigrants who intend to settle in Nova Scotia. And under the program, Nova Scotia can set selection criteria and is permitted to nominate up to 200 immigrants per year. In August 2002, that was great news. However, unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, when employees from the nominee program appeared before Economic Development Committee back in November of 2003, they reported that they had issued only 16 nomination certificates and 10 more were pending. And I understand as late as February of this year, less than 30 were issued altogether out of a possible 400. So my question to the Minister, why almost 2 years after the announcement of this program has the province not used this tremendous opportunity to have 400 new immigrants come to Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you very much. And as the honourable member well knows, the program was set up last year after the announcement in 2002. And certainly staff has been working closely with the Federal Immigration Department to ensure that we encourage immigrants to Nova Scotia with skill sets that will benefit any region of this province, but specifically rural Nova Scotia.
The honourable member for Cape Breton West on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, according to the department's website, there are two ways that potential immigrants can qualify under this program: as economic or investor immigrants, or in fact as skilled workers. And it is my understanding, Mr. Speaker, the department has contracted with a private contractor to solicit and review applications under the economic category. I also understand that the majority of the certificates issued to date have been to the investors' side of the issue, and that the skilled workers portion of the program is simply not a priority within that department. So my question to the minister, given the skills shortages we face in this province, what immediate steps will the minister take to ensure that the skilled worker portion of this program is utilized?
The Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and the honourable member raises a good point. Skilled workers are an extremely important part of this program, and our staff work very closely, as I've said, with the federal immigration to attract individuals whose skills we require throughout the province of Nova Scotia.
The honourable member for Cape Breton West on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, last year, less than 1% of the total immigrants who came to Canada were settling in Nova Scotia, as opposed to in Manitoba, with a population of similar to Nova Scotia, where immigration was a priority. Their nominee program has been tremendously successful, with over 70 people employed on that division of government alone. Here in Nova Scotia, only 3 people are employed for the entire program. And this year's target in Manitoba will be 10,000. So my question to the minister, what assurances will the minister give this House that the necessary resources will be directed to immigration and the provincial nominee program to ensure that Nova Scotia remains competitive?
The Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And as the honourable member knows, immigration is a very important tool in growing the economy here in Nova Scotia, and a wise investment, and certainly very much a priority within the department I'm responsible for. The resources for that department are critical, and as we build the capacity, we will see even more successes. And I would urge the honourable member to review the budget tomorrow to see the resources assigned to the Department of Economic Development.
The honourable member for Halifax-Shabukdale.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have a question addressed to the minister responsible for the Emergency Measures Organization. Mr. Speaker, Mark Remington is a small business owner in Halifax. His business, the European Pantry, was hit hard by Hurricane Juan and suffered more than $25,000 in damages. His insurance company has told him he doesn't qualify for coverage. An EMO has told him that he doesn't qualify for assistance because his insurance should cover it. Mr. Speaker, my question to the minister is, how are you helping people like Mr. Remington who appear to be falling through the gaping holes in the system?
The honourable minister responsible for the Emergency Measures Organization.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and certainly the question is a very good one. First of all, as the honourable member has pointed out, insurance, if it's an insurable situation, is the primary source for restoration to pay for the cost. The province of Nova Scotia has an agreement with the federal government under disaster relief, and if it meets those criteria, then certainly they are eligible for assistance. So I would urge the honourable member to supply me with any material I have, and I would certainly have staff evaluate it and see if we can be assistance to the company.
Honourable member for Halifax-Shabukdale on your first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, here's the problem. The Disaster Financial Assistance Office says Mr. Remington doesn't qualify for help because the losses due to power outage are insurable. But his insurance company says he doesn't qualify for help from them because the power outage was off-site. It was outside his immediate premises. Now, Mr. Remington thought he was fully covered. He bought the maximum retail store owner package. His broker thought he was covered, but the company, the underwriter, doesn't agree. So, Mr. Speaker, I wonder if the minister can tell us what his department is doing to investigate how the insurance companies have been handling Hurricane Juan claims.
The Honourable Minister responsible for the Emergency Measures Organization.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I'd certainly would say to members of the House and all Nova Scotians, the insurance companies through this horrific natural disaster have certainly worked very closely with their clients, and we've received very few complaints. Certainly our agreement under the disaster relief program, if it's an uninsurable earning, would be the situation where we would provide assistance to those individuals and businesses. And certainly if the honourable member wants to bring forward the background on this material, I would certainly have officials have a look at the situation and discuss the situation with his insurance company.
The honourable member for Halifax Shabakto on your final supplementary.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, Mr. Remington has lost $25,000, and as everyone can imagine, easily imagine, that's more than a small business owner can easily afford to absorb. Now, of course, he's being forced to pay a lawyer and a chartered accountant in order to fight his insurance company on the claim. And he's already been to the Disaster Financial Assistance Office. But I wonder if the minister is prepared to step in and provide some assistance to Mr. Remington and people who are similarly placed. Thank you.
The Honourable Minister responsible for EMO.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And as I've said to the House, certainly if the private member would provide me with the material, I will have officials look at it.
The Honourable Member for Timberlea Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This province is coming under fire for its embarrassing handling of Hurricane Juan. The federal government has said the province has presented bogus claims, dubious claims, claims that have been inappropriately filed. Meanwhile, we are already knowing that many people were denied help, some are still waiting for settlements, and some settlements are being clawed back. Mr. Speaker, my question to the minister responsible for EMO is, how can you explain your department's poor handling of this situation?
The Honourable Minister responsible for the Emergency Measures Organization.
Mr. Speaker, the member opposite may have many problems explaining many things, but I can certainly state to this House and to Nova Scotians, the Department of EMO has handled this serious natural disaster with their resources in an exemplary fashion. And certainly when you look at the magnitude of the disaster, the timeliness of people who were eligible to receive compensation, this department, this government, this province paid those private individuals so that they had money in their hands to get on with their lives as quickly as possible. It's not us that's holding up things.
Now, Member Timberlea Prospect on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, Ron Duggan is a 70-year-old prospect fisherman. He is prominently displayed in this story of a storm, and I'll send you over a copy. His heroism is recognized. In November, he received a check for $12,823. Yet on January the 22nd, he received this letter from the province in which it says, "We made a mistake, and we want the money back." My question to the minister, given your government's poor example of handling paperwork, based upon the fact of the old motto, "Don't do as I do, do as I say," will you not do the responsible thing, Mr. Minister, and leave Ronnie Duggan alone?
The Honourable Minister responsible for the Emergency Measures Organization.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I think it's important to note the compassion and caring of this government for its citizens involved in the resource sector, whether they be in the fishery, whether they be in agriculture or forestry. This government, without any federal help, because they would not support those claims, created the expanded DFA program for people who were commercial in that sector. And certainly If you were in the fishing sector, the regulations clearly stated that you had to be commercial and receive at least 50% of your income from the fishery. Clearly stated, certainly on that information, if an individual signed because of the impending sworn affidavit, because of the impending fishing season, then the money was advanced to them on that basis. There's accounting procedures afterwards. If they did not qualify under those accounting procedures, then they're required to pay it back.
Now, Member Timberley Prospect on your final supplementary.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, Ronnie Duggan submitted all the necessary documentation. He didn't pad his numbers. He came clean. He told the province everything. In fact, you're questioning the honesty of this 70-year-old fisherman. You are questioning the honesty of the MLA who helped him with the forms. You are questioning the fact that we, after all, are withholding information.
Order, please. Order, please. Order, please. Order. Order, please. Y'all member Timberley Prospect has the floor. Question.
You laugh all you want. There's a 70-year-old retired fisherman.
Order, please. Y'all member Timberley Prospect on his final supplementary, please.
70-year-old.
Mr. Speaker, I have no further questions.
Next question, please. The honourable member for Digby Annapolis.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the minister responsible for economic development. Everyone knows that this government has seemed to have turned its back on rural Nova Scotia. Our young people are leaving at an alarming rate. Between 1991 and 2001, there was a 9% decrease in young people between the ages of 15 and 24 in rural Nova Scotia. As of 2001, 707,334 people in Nova Scotia were living in rural communities. That is 75% of this province. Unemployment rates in rural Nova Scotia are substantially higher than the national average for rural areas. My question to the minister is, what kind of plan, policy, idea, or scheme do you have to stem this tide of economic famine that is affecting our rural communities?
The Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as the honourable member said, it's certainly a large challenge in rural communities, not only in Nova Scotia but in any province, to acquire ways to stimulate the economy and offer job opportunities for our youth. And certainly our document as a government, Opportunities for Prosperity, speaks strongly to that. We've had many successes in reversing the trend over the Liberal years in government through the 90s. We see greenfield manufacturing returning to rural Nova Scotia in the form of Cape Breton castings, in the form of ocean nutrition. We also see opportunities in the contact center with 500 jobs going to Cornwallis, register.com, a number of other issues. As well, Mr. Speaker, I might add, this government has committed significant resources in the upgrade of the community college system, the training, whether it's the fishing industry or community colleges, to keep our young people in rural Nova Scotia and offer that opportunity.
Thank you. The order, please. The honourable member Digby Annapolis on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, in most rural areas, unemployment of youth ages 15 to 24 years is at least twice that of older workers, from as low as 16.1% in Digby County to as high as 46.9% in Victoria County. Lack of employment at this critical point of upwardly mobile young is a major problem for rural Nova Scotia. My question to the minister, what do I or we tell our young people who want to stay in their home communities and be productive citizens who want to contribute if they are young and able to work but can't find no meaningful employment? What do I tell them?
Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And certainly, I would say to the honourable member, he instructs those young people to acquire the type of education and training that offers them opportunities in this province. And certainly in rural Nova Scotia, there are opportunities. We all want to see more. Greenfield manufacturing, whether it's in our resource-based industries which deal with wood products and value add, whether it's in the fishery that deal with value add, we see those numbers and opportunities increasing. We deal very closely on the technology and entrepreneurial and innovation side through InnovaCore, as well as our community college system to ensure that manufacturers and producers have the opportunity to acquire young people with the training they need to fill the positions right here in Nova Scotia. That's why we see over 420,000 people employed here today.
Order, please. Young Member Digby and Apples on your final supplementary.
Young people need support. They need incentives from the government to remain in their communities or to move to rural communities. Basic public services and quality of life are the #1 factor for people determining where to live. My question to the minister, will the minister finally give young people some support and our rural economy some support and end this disturbing trend of youth out-migration?
Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and certainly the member highlighted a number of things, and that's infrastructure and technology. Certainly the honourable member is probably aware that as far as high-speed internet, which is key to many small businesses and people of entrepreneurial spirit, this province is the most wired of any in Nova Scotia. This government has ensured that the community college system has been upgraded that was the previous administration had let to go into disrepair. This government is building hospitals and schools. It's building courthouses. It's fixing roads for the first time in 10 years. The budget has been over doubled, approaching 3 times what the previous administration had cut it to. Those are the basic building blocks to protect rural Nova Scotia.
Order, please. Young Member Halifax Needham.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Health. Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotia, unfortunately, has the highest cancer mortality rate of any Canadian province. And I'd like to table information on the annual report card from the Canadian Cancer Advocacy Coalition that says, and I quote, "We now find an unmistakable correlation between provincial financial support for cancer agencies and cancer mortality." Mr. Speaker, in that report, that Canada-wide report, Nova Scotia fared the worst. So, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to ask the Minister of Health, given the high incidence of cancer in our province, what specific action is your government prepared to take to improve our ranking as the worst province in Canada in which to beat cancer?
Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And the honourable member, of course, asks about a question that is taken very seriously by, I know, all members of this House, but in particular by my department and in the cancer care in Nova Scotia. Of course, within the department, we work very closely with that organization. Mr. Speaker, we're continuing to work with them, and we want to make this, and indeed make this, one of our priorities as a government, and we will be making progress in that regard. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for Halifax Needham on your first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, new cancer treatments are always coming onto the market, yet the provincial Medicare program has not kept pace in Nova Scotia, guaranteeing that Nova Scotians with cancer have access to these treatments. Oral chemotherapy is not always covered. It's not covered, in fact, by MSI outside of hospital. And in many cases, our pharmacare program does not cover these drugs. Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotians without private drug plans are often forced to reduce or go without the life saving medications due to financial hardship. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to ask the Minister of Health, why are cancer patients in this province being handed, in some cases, the equivalent of a death sentence because this government is unwilling to help them pay for oral chemotherapy treatments?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, the pharmacy program that we have in this province is one that does an extremely vigilant job with respect to monitoring the latest in pharmacies that or pharmaceuticals that are available for the treatment of all illnesses, and that includes, of course, cancer care, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Halifax Needham on your final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think that we need a lot more accountability in terms of the accounting that will bring information like this before the public so we know where we stand in the country and how to measure the actions of our own provincial government in providing adequate health care. Mr. Speaker, the report card raises other issues in respect to cancer care, including inadequate home care supports for patients and long wait lists to see specialists and to even begin treatment and get a diagnosis. So cancer is expected to surpass heart disease as the #1 cause of death, and we in Nova Scotia simply cannot afford to continue offering patients inadequate treatment and support. So, Mr. Speaker, my last question for the Minister of Health is, when will you start listening to the public health agencies and cancer patients and work with them to address this serious health problem in the province of Nova Scotia immediately?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and we indeed are working with all agencies and advocacy groups with respect to fighting this dreaded illness. It is a priority. We'll continue to make it a priority, and Mr. Speaker, it is one area of endeavor with additional resources that we will commit to making real progress in. Thank you.
The honourable member for Victoria the Lakes.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Economic Development. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Economic Development has said very little about the Cape Breton economy. Instead, the Minister of Energy has become the self-appointed Minister of Economic Development for Cape Breton. Just this past March, the Minister of Energy went on to lecture the people of Cape Breton that everything is fine and we should stop whining. Since last June, 3,900 jobs have been lost in Cape Breton, according to the statistics provided by the Nova Scotia Department of Finance. My question to the Minister is, when is the Minister going to finally go to Cape Breton and introduce concrete measures of economic development instead of sending down the Minister of Fluff and Bluster from Cape Breton North?
Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, the honourable member, I didn't know if I'm answering or returning a request from a municipal politician or a provincial MLA, but I can certainly assure the member opposite that the situation in regard to industry in Cape Breton is one that is seeing some positive momentum, certainly as of late. When we look at Cape Breton castings, we look at EDS's announcement of late. Those are positive moves, Mr. Speaker, and certainly encouraging. And there's no question my colleague, the Honourable Minister of Energy, certainly has a keen interest in the economy and welfare of Cape Breton, and I am pleased to work with him and share that experience and that foresight. Thank you very much.
Member for Victoria the Lakes on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, I've just heard the Honourable Minister make mention to the offshore development, and I have a press release here from March the 10th that says the Operations Support Manager for ExxonMobil says Atlantic Canada will see limited exploration for offshore oil this year.
Yeah, that's because of you guys.
The Minister of Energy is the government's chief Cape Breton apologist. Last month he told Cape Breton that they received more in services than they paid in taxes. People ask me, Gerald, he's very well articulated, but with no content in the speech. Mr. Speaker, the statistics provided by the Minister of Energy clearly demonstrate that Cape Breton does not receive its fair share of equalization. If the Premier can blame Ottawa for everything, then Cape Breton can blame the province. The bottom line is that all of Cape Breton requires support. So, Mr. Speaker, my first supplementary to the Minister is, what will the Minister do to ensure that Cape Breton receives its rightful share of equalization?
The Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Mr. Speaker, certainly I'm not the minister responsible for equalization payments across Nova Scotia, so I certainly think that my colleague, the Honourable Minister of Energy, would be better suited to reply to that question.
Well, Mr. Speaker, if I'm the Minister for Fluff and Blow, he's the MLA that's known as Foghorn Leghorn in Cape Breton, Mr. Speaker, because he talks the talk and the walk is quite awkward, because 1 minute it's one side of their mouth, it's the Liberal Party, the next minute it's another, depending on the meeting they're in. But I can assure that member that we are not only going to meet our targets for exploration and development this year as we projected, we hope to exceed those targets, and we do it in Cape Breton all the time, and Nova Scotia is growing thanks to this government and our strategy for the offshore, and thanks to the commitment for Nova Scotians to make sure he, the Foghorn Leghorn member, stays in third place in this House.
Now, member for Victoria the Lakes on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker,
Order, please. Order, please. Order, please. The Honourable Member for Victoria the Lakes has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, I'm appalled and I'm excited that I have seen more energy and more thrust from this minister than since he's become the Minister of Economic Development and of Energy. And I hope he uses that energy for Cape Breton, Mr. Minister. And Foghorn Leghorn is a nice person as far as I'm concerned. Mr. Speaker, my final supplementary is to the Minister of Economic Development. Mr. Speaker, Cape Breton is hurting. All jokes aside, areas like my riding of Victoria the Lakes are suffering from high unemployment and severe depopulation. And Mr. Speaker, this minister and this government are doing nothing for Cape Breton. It sounds good on paper. Show me the money. So my final question to the minister is, when will this government address the needs of rural Nova Scotia, especially Victoria the Lakes?
The Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I think it's important to point out to the House that Foghorn Leghorn is an imaginary creation and a cartoon. Another thing I'd like to point out to the House certainly is that there are a number of proven situations that I've listed before where we've seen economic growth and new industries locate and traditional industries increase their production. We'll see opportunities with the issuance of coal leases in Cape Breton. We'll see opportunities with natural gas, possibly LNG, a whole host of other opportunities such as innovation bioscience, demonstration by ocean nutrition. We will celebrate those occasions when the opportunity arises with the citizens of Cape Breton. This government will, rather than celebrating the opening of new Tim Hortons and cash machines as the previous government did. Thank you very much.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Needham.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question through you is to the Minister of Health. Mr. Speaker, numerous families in our province struggle every day to raise children with autism. Mr. Speaker, the Minister met with a group of those parents last fall who are fighting for applied behavioral analysis, the internationally recognized therapy that greatly improves the lives of children with autism. The Minister promised the parents that a working group of experts would decide whether ABA is the best therapy for these children. Well, Mr. Speaker, the working group has done its job, and they have concluded that ABA is not only the best, but in fact the only therapy that is proven to work for children with autism. So now that the Minister knows what we and the parents knew last fall, I would like to ask him, Mr. Speaker, what he's going to do to provide this therapy to children with autism in Nova Scotia.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And the therapy is described as one of the therapies that is appropriate in circumstances when it might be the best therapy. That's not necessarily the situation in all cases, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Needham on your first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, that's the kind of answer that parents of children with autistic children in this province are used to getting from this minister. Mr. Speaker, I want to let the House know that the report is posted on the Health Department's website, and it contains a plan to provide intervention treatment for autistic children across the province. The program described would start in Metro and initially provide intensive intervention for 6 to 8 children for a period of 6 to 18 months. Now, Mr. Speaker, it's great that 6 to 8 children will get some help, but I'm very concerned about the rest of the children with autism in the province. And Mr. Speaker, I want to ask the Minister of Health why his government has abandoned families with children with autism across this province.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, this government has in fact made commitments to the treatment of children with autism, and we have increased funding for that. The most recent report and recommendations that have come forward have a very significant price tag associated with them, and that, Mr. Speaker, is a significant challenge in meeting the health care needs of this province when we would add a very significant figure to that already challenged number.
Honourable Member for Halifax Needham on your final supplementary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Well, I remind the Minister for these families and these children, there is no price tag you can put on their future, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, experts have looked at this problem and they have determined that these children need intense therapies. These therapies are being provided in other provinces in this country, yet in our province, children with autism go without. So I want to ask the Minister, when the consultants were asked to look at the programs and what could be provided, were they given a limited amount of money to work with, and would he commit to tabling here today the terms of reference that were given to the authors of the report that's listed on the Department of Health website?
Honourable Minister of Health.